Hi there once again and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial, and this is going to be episode 16 in the series Python Bytes. In this one we're going to be looking at data types and how to convert them when the need arises. And in order to do so we're going to be creating what you see on the screen, which is a very basic Python effector, which is essentially a counter. That's what we're going to be about in this tutorial, so without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. We'll bring a cube into the scene and set it up 20 by 20 by 20 in the size X, Y, and Z. We can leave the segments alone. We will fillet it, but we'll put a 0.5 millimeter, or rather centimeter, fillet radius on that cube. The next thing to do is drop the cube into a cloner. So I'll hold down my Option key, grab a hold of a cloner, and I want this to be a linear cloner. I don't want it to be along its Y axis. I want it to be along the X. So we'll say 21 along the X, and we'll say 10 clones, just as a starting point for this. Great, so we've got that. We hit H, we can just see those nice and close. So we've got our clones. In the transform, I'll change their color to red. That will be fine, and we can move on from here. The next thing to do is actually bring in a text spline. We'll make the text 20 in height. Just move it up a little bit. And the font, I'm going to use Lemon Milk Pro. You can use any font you like, but I'm just going to set mine to Lemon Milk Pro, which is here. Actually, there is a quicker way you can do that. If you just click on there, you can type in here. You can just literally say Lemon Milk Pro or Lemon. It will come up Lemon Milk Pro. Just discovered that recently. I don't know why it's taken me so long to discover that, but anyway, that's worth knowing. So we've got our text. Now I'm just going to put a 0 in the text spline for now and drop this into an extrude. So I'll hold down my Option key, select extrude, and drop that in. It's fine in the offset direction that we've got, but we only want it to be, say, about 5 in the depth. And in our caps, I'm going to add a rounding of 0.5. So that I've just got a nice little bit of rounding on there. So that's fine. We've got our text spline, and I'm also going to drop this text spline into a null, but I'm going to bring the null onto the screen because I want the null to be positioned at the 0 point of the world there, and then I can just drop my extrude into there. And then we can think about where we're going to position this 0. We can see at the moment it's not quite in the right place, so let's just put it in the middle for the alignment with the text spline. That sorts that part of it out. And then here we just need to move the text spline until it's about halfway along this y-axis here, so that it bisects that by half. That's fine. That's a good position for that to be in. And now our null is at the center of our first clone, and that's where I want it to be. Fantastic. So we've got the elements in. We can also color the extrude. I'm just going to give that a color. It's just going to automatic. I'll make it a green of some description. Let's have a look, see where we are. Sort of limeish green. That'll do. Sort of that kind of pepperminty sort of green. That's fine. That'll do nicely. So those two work together and they contrast each other quite nicely. Fantastic. So that's our elements in. If we select our cloner and we drop a Python effector into the scene, straight away we can see we're having an effect. And we'll go into the effector tab here, select full control, select our scripting layout, open the Python in Python editor, and we'll just make the window a little bit smaller. And then we're ready to start. Well, the first thing we can do is remove the loop and hit execute. And that brings everything back to where we want it to be. Okay, so let's start setting this effector up. First thing I need is a global variable, and I'm going to say global counter. So that's going to be my first variable. I also need the ubiquitous frame variable, so we'll bring that in. Frame is equal to doc.getTime .getFrame, open brackets, get FPS, open double close. So we've got our frame variable, and we know that we can get our frames from our timeline now. Moving on from here, we need to bring in this null, and we also need to bring in our text spline from the object manager here. So we can say null is equal to, and it will be doc.search object brackets open single quotes null close single quotes. So that brings our null in. We can then just copy this line and do some adjustments, paste it in here, and we can say text is equal to, and it will be text spline close single quotes, and that will bring both those objects in. Moving on from here, we can say if frame is equal to 0, and at this point we need to set up our counter here. So we can say counter is equal to, and in here we're going to place -1. That's where we need to start, and you'll see why a little bit later. The next step is to say if frame, and it will be modulo, so a percentage sign 30 is equal to 0. So we want something to happen every 30 frames. It will also happen at frame 0, and that's why we've put -1 in here. You will see it in a minute. So we've got if frame modulo 30 is equal to 0. So if we've hit 30 frames, or every 30 frames, we're going to get a 0. We can then say if, and it will be counter brackets 0, and it will be less than, and it will be count. So we're going to be using our count value here, which is obviously the number of clones that we've got on the screen, -1. We must say -1, because our count value will be 10, but we're ranging from 0 through to 9 with our clones. If we select our cloner in the transform, we select our indexes, you can see that we're starting at 0, we're ranging through to 9, so we must say count -1 for that reason. We can then say counter bracket 0, and it will be plus equals 1. So every 30 frames we're going to add 1 to our counter, so long as it remains 1 less than the count value. So as soon as it hits 9, we won't add any more to it. But what we'll actually do to make that happen is make our frames 300. So as soon as we get to 300, it'll be done. It'll sort itself out anyway. Okay, fantastic. So moving on from this next step, this is where we need to do our first data conversion. You will have seen this one before, but it's worth taking another look at. So we're going to say x is equal to mar brackets, and it will be counter brackets 0 double close. So whatever is in our counter is going to be the index value that we're going to take to get the current matrix, essentially. The current clone. That's what we're going to be looking at here. So we're going to take our current clone, so we're going to take our current matrix, and we're going to turn that into a vector by saying .off, because we're interested in the positional data here. That's the vector I'm using at the moment, .x. So we're converting from a matrix to a vector to a real value in the space of one line. So that's our first conversion. We can then copy this particular line, drop it in here, and say y and y, and then finally do the same thing again and convert this one to the z. So we're getting the real values of our x, y and z axes. That's what we're interested in. Okay, fantastic. So we've got that. And what we're going to do, we're going to actually give the positions of each of these clones to the position of our 0 here. And we're going to make it move along the line. So in order to do that, we need to create a vector value. So we can say vect is equal to, and then it will be brackets x, comma, y, comma, z. So now we've taken our real values and converted them to a vector. So that's another little conversion that we've done. The next thing that we can do is actually position our null. And it's the null that we're interested in, as I said all along, because that's at the position of the center of the clone, and it will be at the center of the next clone, the next clone, the next clone, etc. So let's do that now. So if we say null dot set abs pos, so absolute position, brackets vector, and that will give our vector value to the null. Okay, let's just see if that actually does work. So if we go back to here, so we got name get fps, where are we? Is not defined in line 22. Let's have a look at line 22. That's our frame. So frame is equal to dot get time dot get frame brackets get fps. It should be dot get fps. And I think we're okay now. So I'd missed out the word doc. Make sure you don't do that. Okay, let's see what we can do. So we'll run the sequence, and straight away we can see that our 0 is moving along the line. And when it gets to 300, it will reset. Fantastic. So far, so good. That's working fine. Now, it would be nice if the 0 could become 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and literally take the index values of each of our clones as it moves along the line. Well, how do we do that? Well, there's certainly a way that we can do that. And what we've got to do is basically, where we've got our text spline, and we brought that in earlier, we've got it here. We've got to actually look at this, and we've got to decide where we want to put it. Now, what we can do in this text spline here, in this field here, this is where we need to place our text. So if we drag this in and we just drop it down here somewhere, it always drops it in the wrong place at the moment. I don't know why the editor has started doing that, but anyway, not a problem. So text spline is no good to us. We need to take that away. If we put text, which is our variable here, if we put that directly in front of this here, now we can start working with it. So what do we do? How do we actually get our value into there? Well, we can be forgiven for thinking that what we can do is simply say counter bracket 0, because of course that's where our number is. So if we just select that, place it down here, and we say e is equal to, and then place that in there, you'd think that that might work. But unfortunately, if we try and do that, let's see what happens. See, straight away, you see we've got an error. It's saying that set item, which is what we're trying to do here, expected str not integer, because of course the counter value is a numerical value, it's an integer, but this expects a string, so it expects text. So how can we deal with that? Well, this is where we've got to do another data conversion. So if we were to put str in front of there, open a round bracket and then close a round bracket, we've now converted this integer value to a string. We've stopped it. It's no longer recognized as a number. So it's just a piece of text now. So if we now try this, let's see what happens. And there you go. It's working. And we're counting through. And we're getting the result that we want. Fantastic. So our counter's now working. Now, let's have a look at some of these other parameters that we've got in here. Now, you would think that we might be able to do something with this font, that we might be able to perhaps drag this in, which we can. We can drag it in, no problem at all. We just put it over here, drop that in there. You'd think that we could say text and then say something like equals and just give it an index, because you'd think these all have all got index values, maybe starting with 0 and counting through. No, afraid not. If we put equals 0 in there and we run the sequence, nothing really happens. It says, look, c4d.font data, not integer, is what it expects. Font data. Well, I've done some research into this with font data, and there's not really much to it. But unfortunately, font data cannot be used to change anything in this menu. And the reason for that, I think, is because the menu, if you look at it, it doesn't have the little diamond in front of it, which means that it's animatable. So therefore, this font is not something that you can even work with. Even though you can drag it into here, you can't actually do anything with it because it's not animatable. The same thing applies to the kerning down here. There's no diamond in front of it. You can't do anything with it. even though this is a checkbox here, you can't use anything to change it. And there's a lot more parameters in here when you open it up. And, you know, there's loads of stuff that you can play around with or think you can play around with, but none of it is animatable. So you can't actually touch any of it. So if you don't see the little diamond in front of anything, it means that if you drag it into here, you won't be able to do anything with it. So we can ignore that. Just take that away. However, where we've got, say, reverse down here, if we bring reverse in and put it in the right place, let's just move that over, drop that in here. Now, reverse is a checkbox. So in other words, it's a Boolean. It can be on or it can be off, okay? Don't worry about that. It's because we're not back at 0. Right, so if we say, with Booleans, we know that they can be 0 or they can be 1. But with the interesting thing, in a situation like this, you've actually got 2 different methods that you can use to work with this data type. So you can say is equal to 1, and if we execute that, we find instantly that the checkbox is checked. But we can also, if we put 0 in there, we can switch it back off. We'll just demonstrate that. But we can also say true. Execute that, and that works as well. So you've got 2 different options. And I think when you're working with bools or booleans, it is worth using the convention true and also, of course, false, because that way they stand out as booleans. If we just execute that, we can switch it off. So yeah, I mean, I think that convention, it's a little bit more long-winded than 0 and 1, but you won't be getting confused with working with integers if you work with true and false. It will be very obvious that you're working with bools. So anyway, that basically shows you how you can work with these different data types. Now, there's one last thing I also want to show you, because at the moment our counter, it works, but it's a little bit bland, isn't it? There's nothing particularly interesting going on with it. It just skips along the line and then it skips back to the beginning. Well, we could make this a lot more interesting if we bring in a couple more effectors. So let's bring in a random effector, and we'll also bring in a push apart effector. So let's get one of those. So we've got those 2 effectors in there. Now, if we drop these into our cloner, because I didn't have that selected. Now the order is important. The Python's got to be last. So if we drop the push apart in here, that's straight away starting to work, and we drop the random in here, we can start to have a think about what we're going to do with these. Now at the moment they're a bit wild. They're a bit too wild for my liking. So what I'm going to do with this random effector here, take this down to about 8%. So you just get a little bit of randomness in there. And the push apart I'm going to take down to about 40%. So now we've got things a little bit more sort of on an even keel, and we can see things a little bit more easily. Now what I'm going to do is play around with some parameters in our cloner here, or possibly even in our random effector. Where are we? Let's have a look. Do we want to use this? Yes, I think we do. If we go into rotation and we go into scale, do we want to use those? We probably can do it in here, I think. If we just play around with these, yeah, we can just have a quick play around. We'll get some parameters in there, and then we'll take things from here. So let's start working with the X. If we put 30 in there and 5 in the Y and 100 in the Z, that winds things in a little bit and makes it a little bit more coherent, but not perfect, which is good. And then for our rotations, I'm going to use 30, 30 and 300. And again, that gives us quite a nice look. And then finally for the scale, I'm going to say uniform scale -5. And that gives us the result that we're seeing there. So everything is quite pleasantly arranged. Now, if we simply play the timeline, our number is currently floating above all of our cubes. So it's taking the position, but it would be nice if it also took the rotation and the scale as well. So how do we do that? Well, it's very, very simple to do. What we can do, if I just comment this line out, so I'll just put a hash in front of it and turn it green, so we're not using that line anymore. We can then say null, and it will be set ML. which means set matrix local. We could use MG on this occasion too, because we're working with a null which is not parented into anything. So we'll get the same result if we use ML or MG, so matrix local or matrix global, but we will use the local matrix. And then all we've got to do is say brackets, and it will be mar, so open square brackets counter, open square brackets 0, double close. And now we should find that we get the result that we want. So if we go back to 0, we can see straight away that our 0 is now taking the rotation of our first clone. If we go into our clone, I'm just going to go into the transform and remove the indexes because we don't need to see them. Okay, so let's just play the sequence now and see what we get. And there you go. It's taking the rotation and it's taking the scale of all our clones as well as the positions. And that's made something that was a bit bland and quite sort of boring before into something that's a lot more visually interesting just by changing one data type. Because we, instead of using the positional data, we're using the whole matrix. And it's just one simple change that's made quite a considerable difference. So there you go. This is all stuff that's well worth knowing. So, that's how you can use data types to sort of do quite interesting things within Python. And that's just about what I wanted to show you really with this tutorial. So, as always, I really hope you've enjoyed this one and that it's given you some ideas for things that you can utilize within your own projects. And if you have enjoyed the video, then please give it a like. And if you haven't already, then please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and of course, ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, then please do share this video because all this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that just about brings the curtain down on this one. So I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.